I would now like to talk about flipped learning and the implications for student learning. And again, I'd like to focus on the traditional approach to teaching as being teacher-centered versus the student-centered approach of the flipped classroom model. In talking of the traditional teaching approach, we often look at students as passive learners. And this is very clear when we do lectures. It's actually the teacher who is engaged in an activity, talking, lecturing. And all the student is meant to do is to just sit tight in a seat and passively learn content. Try to passively understand what the teacher is saying. In a flipped teaching approach, the student ceases to be a passive learner. He becomes an active learner. And this active learner, he becomes an active learner because the student, as facilitator of knowledge, tries to design activities that are meant to engage the student with the learning content more meaningfully and deeply. And this can be done through role play, simulations, case studies, discussions, or interactions with peers, and which is a subject which we touch upon next week on active teaching and learning. In addition, from the viewpoint of traditional teaching, the student typically is what we might consider to be a dependent learner. The student depends on the teacher for his learning. So he goes to the classroom expecting the student to help him understand content, expecting the teacher to kind of download information into his mind. Now, in a flipped teaching approach, the student cannot become a dependent learner. He has to be an independent or an autonomous learner. This means, therefore, that on his own, he must have the initiative to engage with the learning content on his own. We need to make students understand that if we flip the classroom, students must be able and be prepared to actually accept greater responsibility for their learning. In addition, the idea being that in a traditional teaching approach, the student typically is a recipient of knowledge. And the teacher defines his role as being able to lecture. So if a teacher is able to lecture, he has succeeded in covering content, then he has succeeded. In a flipped teaching approach, we must realize that at the end of the day, the students are actually constructors and creators of knowledge. No matter what we say to them, what they learn is shaped by their own experiences. It is shaped by prior knowledge that they have. It is shaped by their context, by their situation. So if we talk to 100 students, we actually, for example, have the same content. The kind of learning that happens in each student is vastly different because of differences in prior knowledge, differences in experience, differences in context and situations. And more importantly, in the flipped teaching approach, we need to be able to make better use of the ability of students actually not only to construct knowledge, but actually to create knowledge of their own. And so in other words, when we talk about active learning activities, we would like to give students opportunities to be able to create learning artifacts, for example. And that is something that we hope to see, because by giving opportunities for students to create learning artifacts, whether this can be in the form of essays, or in the form of blogs, or in the form of wikis, or in the form of projects, or in the form of cases that they may work on, then we give students more opportunities to engage more meaningfully and deeply with learning content. Well, if you look at the traditional teaching approach, a lot of the learning happens in the classroom. In the flipped teaching approach, a lot of the learning occurs outside of the classroom because the students are able to engage with the learning resources in advance, and even after they listen to your video presentations, for example, or even after they engage with the learning resources that you have put out, if there are questions that they have, they always have the opportunity to consult somebody else. They can talk to their parents, they can talk to their family, they can talk to friends, they can talk to their peers, or they can access the internet again to look into learning material for them to be able to enhance their learning. And that gives us a sense that as far as learning is concerned, learning no longer happens within the classroom. Learning obviously happens outside of the classroom. If you look at traditional teaching, oftentimes students listen to lectures in class. And the difference is students now actively engage with learning content in class. It's no longer about the lectures. In traditional teaching as well, students struggle to grasp learning content which can be very fleeting. And it's quite difficult actually for any of us to try to listen to a lecture for an hour, for example. But that is something that we typically impose on our students. And especially if our lecturers happen to be very boring and unengaging. Imagine forcing students to listen to what we say. And oftentimes, they just disconnect. Oftentimes, they just don't listen to us. Now, the beauty of the flipped teaching approach then is that we provide students not to have a very fleeting engagement with the learning content, but they're able to engage deeply with their learning content, not only in class, but even outside of the classroom. In the traditional teaching approach, the questions are, what and how should I think? That's what students typically do. So if you were to ask a question, and the answers can be ambivalent, students will struggle and say, what exactly is the answer there? And I recall when I was facilitating tutorials before at the University of Auckland, for example, I'd ask a question, and the answer was not really clear-cut. And then they would debate, and then they would argue. But at the end of the session, I was thinking, things are good because I've gotten them to engage and debate a lot. But a lot of them were lost. A lot of them were perplexed. They said, what's the answer? And so oftentimes, students want clear-cut answers to questions. And that is typically part of the traditional teaching approach. Because students would like to ask us, what should I be thinking? How should I be thinking? But in a flipped teaching approach, we encourage the students to reflect on the question, what does this new learning mean for me? So at the end of the day, it's not what we think, but actually what the learning content might be and what they might imply for the student as far as his experience is concerned, as far as his life is concerned. In a traditional teaching approach, typically a lot of the learning happens in that interaction between the student and the teacher, even if it's very depersonalized. But to the student, the teacher is the main source of information. But in a flipped teaching approach, it is no longer the teacher who becomes the central source of information or knowledge, but also the engagement with the peers. So learning with peers becomes a crucial point in a flipped classroom.